the same style.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome back. We're talking about the story of Nuh and the lessons that we can take from the methodology of the da'wah of the prophets in the story of Nuh. And so the first thing that we said is that the first thing that Nuh did is to call the people to worship Allah alone. And then to call the people to obey the commands of Allah and to avoid the prohibitions set by Allah. Of course, the greatest of the commands is to worship Allah, and the greatest of the prohibitions is to make a partner with Allah and to obey the messenger. And this is what we call to in our da'wah. And in reality, this methodology works just as much for Muslims as it does for non-Muslims. So with regard to our Muslim brothers and sisters who have slipped from practicing Islam, the same methodology applies. That we first of all establish that they are committed and firm upon the worship of Allah alone, and that they don't worship anyone besides Allah, whether knowingly and deliberately or whether through falling into some misconceptions. And that's the first thing we clear up and the first thing we deal with. And then we call them to obey the commands of Allah and to avoid the prohibitions set by Allah, to rectify their intention and to obey the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to follow his sunnah. أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاتَّقُوهُ وَأَطِيعُونَ. And then within our da'wah, as we said before the break, we use at-targhib wa-tarhib, the encouragement to do good and the reward of doing good, and the discouragement of doing evil and the punishment of doing evil. And this is used throughout the Quran, and it's so sad that we sometimes miss this out of our da'wah. We tell people, you must worship Allah. You must worship Allah. Brother, you must worship Allah. Sister, you must worship Allah. And we don't give them any encouragement, nor do we tell them the punishment of not doing so. So a better methodology would be to say, brother, you need to worship Allah, and sister, you need to worship Allah. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, for Allah has forbidden the hellfire from the one who says, La ilaha illallah, seeking by this the face of Allah. Allah Azza wa Jal has made the hellfire haram. Tell them the hadith of the bitaqa, of the man who came with 99 scrolls as far as the eye could see. Not one good deed could he find. And on the other side he has a piece of paper with La ilaha illallah. He says, my Lord, what will this do against that? What will this piece of paper do against that? And then his deeds are weighed, and the paper with La ilaha illallah, the little piece of card with La ilaha illallah, outweighs all of the sins that he did. Targhib, encourage them to worship Allah. Tell them the reward of worshipping Allah. Encourage them to paradise. Tell them about paradise. How is a non-Muslim living in this world? وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. The one who turns away from my remembrance will have a hard life, a difficult life. They're living in difficulty, in strife, in confusion. فَإِنَّمَا هُمْ فِي شِقَاقٍ. They are in confusion and disarray, and in opposition to what is giving their hearts tranquility and rest. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Indeed, by the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. So after all of that, and you know what situation they are in their hearts, even if their faces are smiling, and you know how bad their situation is, and how far away they are from the truth, and how sad they are in the deepest part of their heart because they can't find rest, then encourage them, tell them the beauty of paradise, tell them that there's a life after this, tell them the reward, tell them the great feeling of obeying Allah, tell them the mercy of Islam, give them good reasons to do things, and then tell them the sin of not doing it. Tell them whoever makes a partner with Allah, فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةَ وَمَأْوَاهُ النَّارِ إِنَّهُ مَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةَ وَمَأْوَاهُ النَّارِ وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ. The one who makes a partner with Allah, Allah has made Jannah haram. Look at the difference. Haram and haram. You worship Allah and the hellfire is haram for you. You turn away from the worship of Allah and Jannah is haram for you. وَمَأْوَاهُ النَّارِ, and his place is the hellfire. Follow the example of Nuh and integrate the warning and the glad tidings. Give them the glad tidings if they obey. Give them an incentive to do it, as Allah Azza wa Jal did. And we are not from those people in our aqeedah, in our belief, who say that the people need to simply worship Allah upon love. Rather, we worship Allah upon love and hoping for His reward and fearing His punishment. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ يَبْتَغُونَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمُ الْوَسِيلَ أَيُّهُمْ أَقْرَبُ وَيَرْجُونَ رَحْمَتَهُ وَيَخَافُونَ عَذَابَهُ. What does Allah Azza wa Jal say about the prophets and the Salihin? They are the ones who call upon Allah, desperately seeking a means to get near to Allah. Which of them is nearer? And they hope for His mercy and they fear His punishment. This is how the prophets used to be. People need an incentive and a reason for them to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. It's naturally what is going to be good for them. But people need to see a reason, and they need to have hope in the mercy of Allah, and they need to have hope that there is a life better than this, and they need to know a reason to avoid what they're doing now, and a reason to turn away from the worship of other than Allah and the punishment of Allah when it comes. All of these things together, and this we see from the beginning, just the first few ayat of the surah Nuh alayhi salam. قال رب إني دعوت قومي ليلا ونهارا فلم يزدهم دعائي إلا فرارا وإني كلما دعوتهم لتغفر لهم جعلوا أصابعهم في آذانهم واستغشوا ثيابهم وأصروا واستكبروا استكبارا ثم إني دعوتهم جهارا ثم إني أعلنت لهم وأسررت لهم إسرارا فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا. These next ayat in Surah Nuh tell us something about the methodology of the prophets in da'wah and the methodology of Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam. He said, my Lord, indeed I have called to my people night and day. But my calling added nothing but to their flight from the truth. And indeed, every time I called them, that you might forgive them, they put their fingers in their ears, and they covered themselves with their garments, and they persisted, and they magnified themselves in pride. Then I called to them openly. Then I proclaimed to them in public, and I proclaimed to them in private. And I said to them, ask the forgiveness of your Lord, indeed He is the oft-forgiving. Look at the da'wah of Nuh. Adding to this, that the Prophet ﷺ indicated to us that Nuh gave da'wah for 950 years. 1,000 years less 50. 950 years. Look at the patience. Look at the varying methodology. Look at how Nuh wasn't content. If one way didn't work, he would try a different approach, and he would vary his approach with his people. And this is something that we want to talk about extensively in this episode, insha'Allah ta'ala, and in the next episode, when we conclude talking about Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam, that Nuh was patient and persistent in his da'wah. He called upon his people night and day for 950 years. What did his people do? They put their fingers in their ears. They covered their garments over their heads. They persisted in refusing. And they had this huge pride. What did Nuh do? Nuh called to them openly, proclaimed to them in public and proclaimed to them in private. Look at the patience. You give da'wah to one person, or we give da'wah to one person, and that person says, I'm not interested, and we say, this one's not going to become Muslim. Next. Look at the patience of Nuh. 950 years of his people rejecting him, of them putting their fingers in their ears, of them refusing to listen to him, of them covering their heads with their garments. 950 years of Nuh calling his people to Islam. And then look at the variation in the method of da'wah. He calls to them openly. If it doesn't work, he calls to them in public. If it doesn't work, he speaks to them in private. He varies his methodology. And like this, we must be. We must do the same in our da'wah. Sometimes we can give da'wah from a public podium. Sometimes we can give da'wah from a stall in the street. Sometimes we go to people's houses and speak privately to somebody. Sometimes we call them aloud and invite them, and sometimes we are more subtle. We vary our methodology according to the methodology of the Prophets alayhimus salatu wassalam. And we're going to continue talking about Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam in the next episode. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
The same moon, the same star.